Tigrai Television English Program Service, coming to you live from Maqala. I'm Lalan Tajani with today's news, and now I'll proceed to the details. A year ago, on the 24th of June, 3 Medicines Sans Frontiers MSF staff members were killed at the hands of Ethiopian soldiers while operating in Tigray. Marking the one-year anniversary of the tragic killing of Maria, Tedros, and Johannes, the president of MSF, Paula Gill, issued a statement on Friday where she stated failing to hold the perpetrators accountable will have an impact for future humanitarian works in Ethiopia and elsewhere in the world. For more, Abel Tsakabo.
President of Medicines Sans Frontiers Spain, Paulo Gil, issued a statement on Friday marking 1 year since the tragic killing of 3 of its employees, Maria Hernandez, Tedros Mariam, and Johannes Halafom, in the war on Tigray. The statement said that MSF had repeatedly reached out to Ethiopian authorities who had made repeated assurances that an investigation was underway but have not specified on when preliminary findings would be brought to light. The president stated her disappointment that even a year later the government was no closer to answers than it had been a year earlier. The MSF noted that it is aware of how dire the situation is for the people of Tigray and marked that it is its desire to continue to do its life-saving work in Tigray if the Ethiopian government can give necessary security assurances and allow them to operate safely. The president finally stressed on the need to hold perpetrators accountable, saying if there is no accountability for such crimes on humanitarian workers, it will set a dangerous precedent for humanitarian works striving to serve those in need. New York Times published an article in March with evidence that indicated that Ethiopian forces had committed the brutal killings up on the order of high-level commander.
A year ago this week, the Ethiopian government bombarded the Togoga market, killing 65 civilians and injuring more than 400. We visited Togoga a year later and met with residents that tell us the airstrike has left the district in ruins, with many dead and wounded and the property of civilians destroyed. For Kubra Mulderhan's report, Sarah Khalali.
A year ago this week, an aerial bombardment of a village market just 25 kilometers from Maqala would take the lives of dozens of innocent civilians. The town of Togoga, located just west of Maqala, turned into a scene of carnage on June 22. Highlights Baha, Tsagab Gabritinsaye, Ta'ama Gabrahiwot are just a few of the residents present during the airstrike that fateful Tuesday. They say the airstrike came as a complete surprise.
There were a lot of people inside the house. Shrapnel got 9 people inside the house. 4 of the people there with me died. My 4-year-old son Aaron Hailai was one of them. I had serious injuries on my head, in my ear. My eardrum was torn. There is still a piece of metal inside my ear, but I couldn't get the treatment I need because of the siege.
I would have never expected for the market to be hit by airstrike. Many died. My firstborn son is dead, and also my daughter's arm is cut off due to the airstrike. It was unspeakable massacre.
I
regained my consciousness after I reached the hospital. I had almost died. I was injured in so many places on my body, especially on my head. I still feel dizziness. My back and my waist were also injured. The clothing I was wearing had burned.
Ma'arg Taddala and his wife Rigba Alamu depended on the income from their restaurant in Togoga before the airstrike. They say their restaurant was completely destroyed. Not only that, but they also lost family members and customers that day.
The bomb fell right there. The house next to ours. The house with 6 rooms. It's completely destroyed now. You can see it. It was right there at the time of the airstrike, right next to the bamboo sticks. I was working at my restaurant. My wife's sisters were injured, especially her little sister was hit on her waist and her face. My wife was also hit in the head. Her skull is broken. It's only covered by her hair.
More than 10 of our customers' bodies, including priests and small children, were dug out from my restaurant. It was here. Following the airstrike, Ethiopian soldiers wouldn't allow health workers to travel to the area. Residents say they believe this is the reason that many were lost in Togoga.
There were soldiers at a checkpoint in Koholo, near our town. They refused to let vehicles pass. They wouldn't allow ambulances to take the wounded. They said the junta shouldn't get medical care. Some didn't go to the hospital for 2 days. That's why we lost so many lives.
Those who were injured couldn't go to the hospital because ambulances were not allowed to pass. They wouldn't even allow civilians to leave the area. Still today, a year after the deadly strike, Togoga is scarred. Its residents are being denied access to aid and medical treatment by the Ethiopian government. What more, surprising is the silence of the world in the face of such impunity and disregard for human dignity.
IDPs forced to leave their homes, their property, and their communities behind in search of shelters have been the most affected by the ongoing siege that has blocked all forms of assistance from reaching Tigray. Our reporter Winta Kiran spoke with Lagasa Nagash, a diabetic patient in Asarta Shuat IDP camp, who tells us living conditions have become beyond bearable. Let's take a look.
Lagasa Nagash is a single father. He says him and his 2 children used to lead a happy life in Humera before Ethiopian soldiers, together with their Eritrean allies, came and forced them to leave their home.
After the days of my first wife, I was raising my children by myself. I was a model farmer. I used to have a farm with an irrigation system and many livestock. My income showed a steady increase. I had a tractor and a car. I had a good life before Ethiopian and Eritrean soldiers started bombarding our home.
Lagasa tells us that on 7th of November, Eritrean forces started to indiscriminately shell his hometown, forcing residents to leave in search of shelter.
I left with my daughter, but we left before we could find my son. We wouldn't meet him until 3 days later on our way to Dadabi. Then we traveled to Aksum. We saw the massacre unfold there on November 19. Eritrean soldiers would kill whoever they could find. We ran away to Adwa to save our lives. We would reach Maqala in December.
Lagasa says he left everything he owns back in western Tigray. He's now sheltered in an IDP camp in Maqala where he has no food or access to health care.
I left home with no food, money or any of my belongings. There was my daughter's gold and our help too. We just left it all there. After we came here, it was the people of Maqala that used to help us. But now, they too have nothing. And there is no humanitarian assistance. There is no food or medication.
Lagasa says the situation has been especially testing in light of his condition. Lagasa is diabetic. He says his condition is deteriorating on a daily basis because he's not able to get his medication.
I haven't had any medication for the past 3 months, and it's making my condition worse. My doctor tells me to do exercise, but I am so weak because I don't have much to eat, and sometimes there is nothing to eat at all.
Favan Girmay, health officer from World Vision, says many of the chronically ill patients are unable to get proper medication due to the blockade. She says the condition of patients living with multiple illnesses is deteriorating on a daily basis.
Averagely, around 30 to 50 clients are visited our clinic weekly, but most of them are chronically ill patients, and from the children who are coming, these are also malnourished due to different reasons. They are attacked by malnutrition, and around 20 people are here chronically ill, and they are not getting their medication monthly. They suffer to get their medication because we are not giving them monthly due to the blockade. There is no transportation, there is no communication, so we cannot get medications properly.
There are more than 2.2 million IDPs in Tigray whose lives wholly depend on humanitarian assistance that is deliberately being blocked by the Ethiopian government.
In the 8 months that Tigray was under the occupation of Ethiopian and Eritrean forces, many women and girls have been subjected to rape and to sexual slavery. Our reporters spoke with one survivor from the district of Kanta Afashum in eastern Tigray who was gang raped by Eritrean soldiers. For more, Sarah Kalali.
Sexual violence was just one of the many tools used by invading forces to terrorize Tigrayans into submission. We spoke to one survivor from Ganta Afashum in eastern Tigray that tells us that Eritrean soldiers came to her home late at night, demanding she tell them where her husband was.
It was on November 9. 5 Eritrean soldiers came to my house. They called me a junta and asked where my husband was. I told them I didn't have a husband. They saw my daughter and asked whose she was. I explained that she was mine, but that I didn't have a husband. They wouldn't believe me and kept asking me where my husband was.
The survivor says they then started to beat her and her daughter. She tells us she was coming in and out of consciousness, but remembered the men taking turns to rape her.
One of them ordered the other to hit me, and he hit me on my face with his rifle, and I fell down. He told the others to leave the house and told me to stand up. He took my daughter away from me and threw her on the bed. He pulled my leg and I fell on the floor. I was not fully conscious at the time, but I remember 3 of them coming and raping me. After doing all this to me, they started to discuss whether to kill me or not. It wasn't even on a bed, it was on the floor. I was bleeding so much, but they all came in one by one to rape me. I haven't stopped bleeding since, and I can't control my urine. And then one of them turned and called the other one. He said, "With the Halima, you're going to come again later and pay her a visit."
The survivor, like many others in Tigray, has not had access to medical care. Over 90 months later, survivors in Tigray have not been provided with any tools to help them heal.
I have issues with my uterus. I can't even lift a bucket of water, let alone work. Even now, I have to wear sanitary napkins. I can't work to feed myself because of Eritrean soldiers.
Thousands of women and girls in Tigray have been subjected to unspeakable violence by Ethiopian forces and their allies from Eritrea. Equally devastating is the impunity of these forces and the knowledge that justice is a long way off.
The year-long siege imposed on Tigray that has blocked the delivery of all essentially needed items and discontinued basic services has led to the devastation of many in Tigray. Ahmed Mustafa Ali owns a business in Qadamay Wayana Maghala. He says he had once managed to make his business profitable, but is now unable to fulfill basic needs or support those he knows are in dire need. Salome Thaklai has the details.
Ahmed Mustafa Ali is a merchant who's a resident of Maghala. His business is in Qadamay Wayana, one of the most crowded and vibrant marketplaces in the capital. He says he had previously been leading a stable life before the start of the conflict.
Before the start of the war and the siege, my business was doing well. Thanks to Allah, we were able to give our children a good life. We were able to educate our children as well. I even used to help others.
However, now, says Ahmed, the Ethiopian government's blockade on all commercial goods and banking has brought his business to a complete halt. His shop, once busy and full of customers and goods, is now empty.
After the war broke out, leave alone helping others, we ourselves need assistance. We are in a terrible situation. Business is really cold because there is no communication with the other parts of the country. Everything is blocked. The siege has made everything difficult. You can see for yourself here. It is these bottled waters that are left here. I used to be filled with items, but it's empty now. There is nothing here in Maghala now to fill our shelves, so we leave them like this. The shelves themselves can tell our story.
Ahmed says the siege has not only affected his business, he says the blockade has meant that his family too have nothing to eat.
My life has become so difficult. Our children are not going to school because schools are closed. This is difficult for them. Our lives are so difficult. We are just a little better than those who sleep on an empty stomach.
The almost year-long Ethiopian government's blockade on all essential items and services coming into Tigray has devastated many. But unfortunately, for many like Ahmed, the world is yet to take any decisive action to put an end to the inhuman siege on Tigray.
The Ethiopian government declared a humanitarian truce at the end of March, but months later, only about 20% of much-needed aid has been able to reach the many in need. We met with Sanait Geza, a single mother to 2 children, who says is barely able to feed her children. For more, Mironimana.
Sanait Gazai is a resident of Maghala and a single mother to 2 children. She says she's been raising her 2 children by herself since her husband passed away some 7 years ago. But since the start of the war on Tigray, Sanait says she hasn't been able to find any work.
I
used to work and take care of my children. I had hope that I could work and change my life for the better. Sanait says that today her living condition is intolerable. She says she's barely able to feed her children, who sometimes have to go more than a day without a food. I can't work. There's no work with a pay these days. Most times we don't eat anything. If we eat something for breakfast, then we don't eat lunch, and we only get a little for dinner. And if we don't get anything to eat for breakfast, we try and buy bread for dinner. My daughter hasn't had anything since the morning. The blockade on food aid, and especially vital services such as banking and telecommunication, has left many desperate. For a year now, Sanait hasn't had access to her savings, and those that used to support are now just as desperate. No one can help anyone else. No one can access their bank accounts. No one is getting paid. How can anyone possibly help me? Our neighbors share what they have with us, but it's hard to take that help knowing they themselves have nothing to eat. Sanait says the world has to help her and those like her in Tigray that have been denied the right to work or access assistance by the Ethiopian government. The war has taken 2 years of our lives and many innocent civilians. We have undergone unimaginable horror. We demand justice.
That's it for this bulletin. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.